Elimination games and upset potential. This is the College Game Day podcast, the Picks edition. Rece Davis, Pete Thamel, Stanford Steve Coughlin here with you, reminding you, we encourage you to subscribe to the College Game Day podcast so you get every single episode, or download wherever you prefer to get your episodes. We'll start in the SEC with what is a de facto elimination game for Alabama and LSU. Both have lost 2 games, so LSU with only 1 loss in conference play. This is a rivalry, a matchup that sort of defined several years of excellence during the Nick Saban era. Now with Brian Kelly in his 3rd season at LSU and Kalen DeBoer in his 1st. It's taken on a little bit of a different feel, Pete, because these 2 teams aren't right at the top as they customarily are, and there's a sense of desperation in the air when the sun sets in the western sky and it is Saturday night in Tiger Stadium in Death Valley. What do you think happens Saturday night?
Did you ever read the book, It Doesn't Rain
Or Never Rains in Tiger Stadium?
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the great college football books of all time. I remember even Nick brought in the author whose name I'm not going to remember. It's John Ed Bradley. He's an old Sports Illustrated guy from way back in the day. And just like for our listeners who love college football and love like the tradition and like the parochial pride of a place, it's an awesome book. I have no idea what made me think of that. So this is an interesting LSU Bama because like both of them are like a little loosey-goosey, right? Like just Alabama's not Alabama. There's a lot of and again, we didn't expect them to be the merciless stormtroopers they were under Nick, right? But where they rank at penalties right now and just some of the inconsistencies and the structural flaws in the defense have just made this sort of a wild season for them so far. And LSU, you look at them right now, they've got their own issues defensively, although I do give them credit. They've tightened things up a little bit since that Harold Perkins injury. I don't love their personnel still on defense, especially in the secondary. So my head says Bama in some ways because I feel like Bama will be able to move the ball in multiple ways. But I've learned in my wise years to never, ever, ever pick against LSU at home at night. Ever. So I'm not going to. I'm going to take LSU. I'll take them to win. I'll take the points, whatever you want me to take. I am going to take the Tigers. Like, they had no business winning that Ole Miss game. Ole Miss should have won that game 7 different times. But there's a little voodoo in the air down on the bayou.
It's like no other. I always say it's in its own tier when it's good. And this sets up for one of those nights. It is interesting that everyone will talk about the 2 quarterbacks in this game, and the 2 best players on the field are a left tackle for LSU and a guard for Alabama. So that's what I'm really fired up because I believe Alabama has to run the ball with their running backs, to offset and get everything going. We've seen Milroe get flustered. We've seen Nussmeier get flustered. And the idea of LSU's offense being one-dimensional and liking to throw the ball, what will Alabama's attack be defensively? Because when you look at LSU, you got to have help on the back end. Nussmeier has shown that he could still, mount up and get his guys up front ready and get those matchups he wants on the back end. So with that, what does Alabama do pressure-wise? They have guys that have overachieved this year that have been program guys. And when you say Alabama's improved, those are the guys that I talk about, the defensive line and that front 7. I don't think their linebackers have played to their capability, or at least my expectation of what I had for them this year. But this is a whole different animal. You come off a bye week. You obviously change your approach to adapt to what LSU brings to the table. So that's the matchup there. And then Alabama and Milroe, decision-making is at a premium. He can't get away with some of the stuff that he's tried to in weeks past. Will that be drilled into him over this bye week? That's what we got to find out. All that said, I believe LSU's pass game is too much for Alabama's secondary, and I will take LSU.
You know, a funny thing about this, we referenced it a little bit earlier in the week. Since 1981, Alabama is only 9-12 in games between these two played in either Birmingham or Tuscaloosa. But LSU is only 4-16-1 in games played in Baton Rouge or New Orleans. Maybe all of that has changed a little bit. It sort of adds to the mystique of the setup of this game. But penalties have been an issue for both teams, as Pete referenced, particularly Alabama. They're 129th in the country in penalties per game and 128th out of 134, by the way, in penalty yards per game. LSU doesn't get penalized for as many yards, but they've had a lot of false starts, and they 7 penalties per game is among the worst in the nation, not quite as bad as Alabama. I think a big thing on this is third down when Alabama's defense is on the field. Over the course of the season, they look as if they have a good third down defense, but I looked it up the other day against Vanderbilt, South Carolina, and Tennessee, 25 of 46 on third down. Now, they were good on third down against Georgia, but Georgia went for it on fourth down every time and got it every time. So getting off the field has been a major problem. Against Garrett Nussmeier, that's going to be an issue. Different defensive coordinator for LSU this year than last year, but it is worth mentioning that Milroe ran for 155 yards and 4 touchdowns against LSU in the game in Tuscaloosa last year. I do agree that Alabama's going to have to use the running backs, but I also think that Milroe is going to have to be more aggressive running the football. He looked like a reluctant runner in the Tennessee game. He cannot be that against LSU. LSU has to hit the big shots down the field. They have the opportunity to do that. Alabama's got some youth in some places. They're playing a different style of defense than they've played in the past. And I think between the new pieces who have transferred in, the freshmen that they're playing back there, and the new system for the veterans, it's made them vulnerable in the back end. I think this is going to be a tight game. It's probably going to come down to who leads a final drive. Will it be Nussmeier or will it be Milroe? I've faded Alabama a lot this year, as you guys know. I'm going to say Milroe leads the drive. I'm going to say Milroe channels his inner A.J. McCarron, his inner Blake Sims, his inner Jalen Hurts, all of whom have led late drives in that stadium to give Alabama a victory. And I'm going to say Alabama wins the game in a really, really tight one and a great one on Saturday night and stays alive in the playoff hunt.
How many points you guys think wins this game?
I think there's going to be some scoring, Steve.
Okay.
I'm going to say it takes 31 minimum.
All right.
I'm just going to compliment the Blake Sims reference. I wasn't expecting that.
I was there. I was there for that one. That was unbelievable.
That was laying at his peak as a play caller. How many periods of zone read defense do you think they've run at LSU this week after the
after Marcel Reed? Right. Yeah.
Let's just say the 20-hour rule.
Yeah, the 20-hour rule is going to be all.
Well, it's a different coordinator and a different thing that Marcel Reed crushed them. Their last time out.
And the other thing, guys, they were great against Thamel Green in Arkansas, who likes to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
And it also goes back to the coaching job of A&M in that game. But yeah, all hands on deck for that one, man. I can't wait.
Yeah, it's going to be great. And you know what? Desperation for both of those teams to stay alive, and a similar desperation for Ole Miss against Georgia, also on ABC, 3:30 Eastern time from the Grove. Lane Kiffin disappointed that LSU got another night game when he was told it's going to be 3:30. He goes, let me guess, LSU got the night game. Instead, he gets the prime afternoon slot against a Georgia team that has been a little bit confounding because they just haven't always played sharp. They were brutal in the first half against Alabama and brilliant in the second. They were, their hair was on fire the entire game against Texas, but there were moments of sloppiness in there. And then you think, okay, well, now they've turned the corner, and then they go out and the Florida game was, we're like, what is with these guys? But now you have another big game. Georgia's favorites, so Kirby can't say everybody's doubting them, Steve. But correct. I do think there have been enough questions asked that he'll probably use that as fodder. What do you think happens in Oxford?
I'm trying not to complicate this, but when I keep assessing things, Rece, it goes back to that bias of we've seen Georgia win these games, and we have not seen Ole Miss win these games. Ole Miss also, we saw it last week against Arkansas. just the idea, if you're going to win one of these games, you have to put together 60 minutes, and that hasn't happened in that with Ole Miss in these circumstances. So I'm not going to try and overthink it. I'm going to say Georgia wins the game and frustrates that Ole Miss offense. Boy, would it be a story if Ole Miss were to be able to retaliate and keep their back against the wall, because that's the idea. I don't think anyone has come in, because when we see these rankings now, we assume Georgia's going to stay up there. But what if it were flipped, and what's Ole Miss, 16? How far up do they go and throw a wrench and everything? So there's, again, plenty at stake. I will love the idea of me watching the first half of this game at a tailgate in Baton Rouge also, which is great. Rece, are you familiar
do you
with
have an ability to find
tailgates in random college towns? Is that a skill of yours?
I ate this last year, Rece. Are you familiar with pastalaia?
I am not. Is it
So
like jambalaya, but with pasta instead of rice?
bow ties, yeah.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
Got a dose of that last year at the LSU RV City or whatever they call it. So
they have those deep fryers, Steve, that they bring in like the back of trucks. There's not like one. They're like everywhere.
Everything. Yeah.
Everywhere. Yeah.
So
yeah, your salad is fried in Louisiana. That's what I've learned over the years.
Yeah, so I'm going to take Georgia in a close game.
So a really compelling matchup, because these are two programs we've just wanted a little more from this year, right? We've wanted Georgia to exhibit that dominance that's really kind of defined the sport for the past few seasons. And we've wanted Ole Miss. We've wanted the sum to equal the parts, right? They get all these wonderful parts and wonderful players in the portal, and it just hasn't quite gotten in sync for Ole Miss in either of them. I wish, here's like one of the myths of Ole Miss. Like, it's the Grove is awesome. The weekend is awesome. The game day is awesome. The game, like, that's not, to me, one of the cauldrons that you go to and is like an intimidating environment. I see some skepticism on Rece's face there, but I
agree with you. I just had a snarky retort that I'll save. Go ahead.
Okay, fair enough. We encourage snark here, so don't So I can understand why Lane would want this game to be at night, by the way. I also understand why it isn't, but I can understand why he'd want it to be. So I probably, like, today, as I thought about this, I was like, I kind of want to pick Ole Miss. Like, it just feels like a confluence of time and moment and talent. One thing to watch in this game is going to be Trey Harris. I expect him to be a game time decision again. I don't expect Lane to not run him through warmups, dress him for the first half as a decoy, and then put him on the sideline in street clothes. I actually expect him to be a real game time decision as it goes forward here. He's the nation's leading receiver. Louisiana Tech transfer. He's a huge cog in that offense. But I give them credit that they have found their groove without him, which they did not have in the second half of that game at LSU. Their offense really gummed up in Baton Rouge that night. So all that said, until I see Georgia lose to someone other than with an A on the helmet, I'm going to take Georgia.
Pete, I agree with your sentiment about Ole Miss completely. But if we say that too much, there's a high degree of likelihood that a red high heel stiletto will come flying out of the stands onto the field. And that has happened before. Not that we encourage such behavior, but
from a red-shirted Miss America.
A red-shirted Miss America may take off that red pump and hurl it toward the field at Vaught Hemingway. Again, do not do that. Don't throw anything on the field. We don't need that. But if not now, when? For Ole Miss. Ole Miss historically 1-25 against teams in the top 2 of the Associated Press poll. They haven't won a game like this. Last year, when game day was in Athens, and we referenced this game earlier in the week, Georgia crushed Ole Miss, and it was that game that led to a lot of the changes that Lane Kiffin wanted to make. One of his quotes afterwards, when they signed some guys from the portal, we're going to do everything in our power to change the way we look as a team, but especially defensively. We might not be very good, but we're going to look a lot better in our uniforms. And a lot of that was signing players that were already significant players in the SEC. well, they do look better in their uniforms, and they are very good. They could, we've gotten on them a little bit. I've gotten on them a little bit for letting the LSU game get away, and more notably, not winning the Kentucky game. Got to win those games if you're going to be where Ole Miss aspires to go. That said, I think they're really, really good. Walter Nolan, Princely Umanmielen, the SEC transfers that he referenced. On the offensive line, Nate Kalepo and Julius Buelow they got from Washington. And the offensive line still needs to keep Jackson Dart from getting hit as often as he has, particularly with these cats coming in red and black on Saturday. They're going to have to protect him. I'm sure Lane will have a great plan for getting the ball out of his hand quickly. And Dart is now second in the nation, throwing for 357 yards per game after that virtuoso performance against Arkansas on Saturday, over 5 bills, 6 touchdowns, and a mere 6 incompletions in that game. But this ain't Arkansas, Pally. This is Georgia. I do think that Georgia's going to have to try to find a way to run it a little bit, and that is a hard thing to do against Ole Miss. They lead the nation allowing just over 2 yards per carry. They're second in yards per game allowed. They get to the quarterback, 41 sacks. Georgia's only allowed 10 all season. Here's the whole game. Can Georgia run it a little bit, and can Carson Beck take care of it? He's thrown 11 interceptions. That's second most in the country, according to our True Media stats. Only one guy in Power 4 has thrown more, Kyle McCord at Syracuse. Can't do that. If he does that, Ole Miss will win the game. If he turns it over 2 or 3 times, Ole Miss will win because Ole Miss will find a way to score some. That said, Oregon deserves to be number 1. I believe Ohio State, because its consistency and performance, deserves to be number 2. But there is one team that I will not bet against, and it's Georgia. So I'm going to say Georgia goes in to Oxford on Saturday afternoon. Ole Miss plays its guts out, and Georgia does Georgia things and figures out a way to win the game. In the Big 12, Iowa State, coming off its home loss to Texas Tech, which spoiled its perfect season, will go to Kansas, which has had its season spoiled by an array of close games. Pete, you start with this one. Who wins, the Cyclones or KU?
You know what, Rece? Pick the upset here. I feel like Kansas has a bunch of opportunities to spoil somebody's season as their schedule goes on. And obviously it's a different, call of an upset here if Iowa State had figured out a way to hold off Texas Tech, which they didn't in the final minute, and credit Joey McGuire for that really intriguing play call to get Taj Brooks around the right side in that Wildcat. The Wildcat, when you have a very good quarterback, can be controversial on the goal line. And I think they had a false start on it once or twice during the game. So give them a ton of credit for doing that. But listen to this Kansas closing kick here. They have Iowa State. They go at BYU, home Colorado, and at Baylor. So 3 of the 4 games really could have Big 12 title implications. So I feel like Jalen Daniels, it has a moment in him this season. He has come back, not to the level we remember him from 2 seasons ago, but he's been good. And I just feel like Kansas coming off a bye, this is their Super Bowl. I think they're going to pull the upset. So I will channel my Rece Davis and then can tuck my tail the rest of the season if I'm wrong.
There is a formula there. You have to be able to run the football against Iowa State in that scheme and that defense, and Kansas will have a plan to do that. My issue is Kansas on the other side of the football and what Rocco brings to the table. I'm with you. I mean, when you look at it, guys, 7-1 Iowa State against 2-6 Kansas, and the line is 3. Like they're telling you how close this game is.
Somebody knows something.
I'm just gonna say Iowa State's our offense is too much against that Kansas defense. Is this at Arrowhead or the soccer stadium or the
it's
Raceway?
at Arrowhead.
All right, Arrowhead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna. Iowa State wins very, very close.
This is going to be close.
Yeah.
Iowa State coming into this season had lost 13 of its last 16 one-possession games. They had won a couple of those this season already, and then Texas Tech got them in the end. I tend to agree with Pete that Jalen Daniels is going to have a moment that they're going to clip somebody because Kansas has underachieved, largely for the reason that most teams in the Big 12 underachieve. they are not winning close games. Kansas has 6 losses already. 5 of them are one-score games, including losses by 2, 3, and twice they've lost by 4 points, once by 6. In their lone double-digit loss, they lost by 11 to TCU. They had the lead in the second half. They've been in every game. They make the catastrophic error, as they did against Kansas State, to cost them the game. It's happened time and time and time again this year. I think they get somebody. I don't think that somebody's Iowa State. I think Iowa State bounces back from its loss to Texas Tech, and they get the victory over Kansas and continue to chug forward and take a step closer to making it to that Big 12 championship game. Everybody wants to have a chip on their shoulder. Who has the biggest chip on the shoulder in the South Carolina Vanderbilt game in Nashville? Nobody respects Vanderbilt. They're better than you think. Oh, you AP voters voted, and my South Carolina Gamecocks are not among the 25 best, so I guess we'll see. Shane Beamer feeling his oats after South Carolina put it on Texas A&M. All kidding and teasing aside and chop busting aside, this is a good one. A South Carolina team that's a couple of plays away from its record being college football playoff type consideration, and the same is true for Vanderbilt of all teams. I mean, these are two really solid teams. Pulled some upsets, had some games where they came up short. Steve, what do you think? Do you get Lenorst or you get Paviad here at the end of this game in Nashville?
I don't love how South Carolina, after a win, treats it like they've never won a game before. But to their credit, I will say it here, they are the best 5-3 team in the country, Rece Davis. South Carolina has that. When you look at what Vanderbilt did, it got, we talked about it on the show, it got super trendy against Auburn, and not knowing what Auburn was going to bring to the table. And Vandy goes there and gets the win to become bowl eligible. Another great story for the football and the sport, and especially them and what they're trying to build. If that stadium ever gets finished in Nashville with the cranes there. So I just think South Carolina has too many difference makers. I am fascinated to see what Pavia does against that defense. Beamer, I think he told Molly, or the report was going into the second half, they can't block us, and A&M couldn't block them. And Vanderbilt has that daunting task now. So I'm going to say South Carolina wins by a field goal.
So what a quintessential 2024 the world has changed game here, right? you have Vanderbilt, off its unbelievably savvy coordinator hire. They bring in the quarterback. They also quietly filled a lot of holes in the portal. And these are now, as Clark Lee's been there a few years, there's some recruiting, growing up, classical college football development that's happened there. And then you have South Carolina, which just has, Dylan Stewart, one of the most electric freshmen in the country, coming off the edge. You've got Kyle Kennard, who's had just an unbelievable year, the Georgia Tech transfer on the other edge. I really feel like Vanderbilt's offense, which is prolific in their execution monsters, especially Pavia on third down, you never want to bet against him. I just feel like they're going to meet some resistance with that South Carolina defensive line. And I do think one of Vanderbilt's allies this season has been the century of horrible football they played. I feel like that's gone now. I feel like people are going to now go into Vanderbilt and saying, okay, this is a difficult SEC game. So, think about Vanderbilt had Missouri beat 3 different times in Columbia. Not that Missouri's any great shakes, but they're a very good, program. So that said, I just feel like South Carolina is going to come in with an edge, and there's a lot of what ifs with this South Carolina season, right? What if Sellers doesn't get hurt for the second half of that LSU game? He was running at will in that game. He was slicing and dicing them. So I am going to take the Gamecocks, and but I think it's gonna be an awesome game. I really do.
I'm looking forward to the game as well. And Diego Pavia loves Johnny Manziel, as we know. And as you think back on Manziel's career, not many teams did much with him. But I remember early on, the first year he played LSU with great athletic defensive ends, and Florida also kept him bottled up mostly. Auburn did a good job against him. Pavia was only 9 of 22 for like 143 yards or something passing, and didn't hurt them that often scrambling. Didn't run for many yards either. I love what Vanderbilt's done. If South Carolina is the best 5-3 team in the country, then Vanderbilt's the best 6-3 team in the country, maybe. So this is a clash that you have in the midst of the construction zone in Nashville. I don't like the spot for South Carolina because anytime you come off a home win like they had against Texas A&M and everybody storms the field and you're feeling great about yourself, it was why I was so convinced that South Carolina was going to beat Texas A&M, because Texas A&M had a similar emotional type win, the way they pulled away from LSU in their previous game. I'm not completely convicted on this, but I'm going to pick the Gamecocks. I think it'll be late, so I've just given Diego Pavia a little bit more motivation to get out there and say they just never ever believe in us. I believe in both teams. I think both teams are really, really good teams that with just a couple more breaks that they're already having good seasons. They could be having great ones. And this game for both teams is going to sort of determine whether they had a good season with notable upset in the middle of it, or whether they potentially have a great season where they can go on to win, eight games, maybe 9. Vanderbilt's going to get a swing at Tennessee, at the end.
Yeah.
So it's a real pivotal game for both because of those defensive ends and Sellers' ability to run the ball. I'm going to say South Carolina follows up and pulls it out, but I'm not 1,000% sold on it because, as I said, I don't like the emotional spot here for the Gamecocks coming back and doing it. Speaking of emotion, it will be running high. Not long ago in Lubbock, they were befuddled by the beatdown that Baylor put on them. Then they had another heartbreaking loss to TCU. But then they go into Ames. They give Iowa State their first loss of the season. So the tortillas will be flying around Lubbock in the pregame for sure when Travis Hunter, Shedeur Sanders, and Deion Sanders come rolling in. Colorado with a path to get to the Big 12 title game. And Colorado, Pete Thamel, is favored on the road. What do you think?
I think that Texas Tech is just going to have a hard time
stopping Colorado. I believe the Texas Tech defense ranks number 129 nationally in total defense, giving up 462 yards a game. And one thing I've learned about Shedeur Sanders and Deion since they took over is they play wildly entertaining games, and they tend to, this year, win the shootouts. So I think they go and they figure out a way to do it. I give Colorado a lot of credit. We're going to talk about this on Game Day on Saturday, Rece. The way they've recalibrated that program with the new coordinators to go just sort of from a hell on wheels, Art Briles-ish style to a little bit more formalized. And defensively, especially the teams that have played them, I don't think they're like crazy exotic, but they've become nuanced enough on both sides of the ball where they can win in different ways. But I predict this game is going to be like 54-53, classic old Big 12 Wild West shootout.
Yeah, I can't wait for this one. It's got all the makings. You got a ranked team on the road with a short spread. Why I like Shedeur Sanders more than any quarterback in this draft class is because of how he can control chaos, and he's going to need to. This place is going to be a zoo. Texas Tech off that win, knowing what they have brought to the table offensively. I think I texted you, Rece, look at Texas Tech's resume, and you lose your mind trying to figure it out and how stuff happens. Going back to their week 0 or 1 game against Abilene Christian. But they've taken steps in the right way, and that's a monster win, man, that you could build off of. I do wonder, with Rece's feelings towards South Carolina, what Texas Tech's emotional feelings are going into this game. So Colorado's offense is the best unit on the most consistent unit on the field, and that's what gets them. I got Colorado by a field goal.
Texas Tech leads the Big 12 in scoring. and they are the worst in the Big 12 in scoring defense. This sets up, this is another one. We've talked about this on the Picks Pod a few times this year when you set up games. I mean, we talked about it with Texas A&M and South Carolina last week. This is the type of game that everybody has lost. Save with the exception of the teams right at the top. Obviously, Oregon hasn't lost to anyone, but sort of broadly speaking, this is what's causing the jumble in the middle of the conference, of various conference standings and the rankings. Teams are losing games like this. And for some reason, maybe it's just the confidence I have in Shedeur to handle this, Travis Hunter to make plays, the fact that although Texas Tech played well on defense in Ames on Saturday and held them to 22 points, I'm not betting against Shedeur Sanders in this against that defense, against a defense that gives up a ton. I think Colorado's defense has improved a little bit. Taj Brooks can really run it. They're a good balanced offense. Brooks is among the leading rushers in the country, but I just think the weapons that Colorado has, the fact that they at least put up some resistance on defense from time to time, I think they'll avoid all of the tortillas. Buffs are going to be favored according to the FPI in their final 4 games. If they win them, they are almost certainly going to be one win away, the Big 12 title game, I mean, from making the college football playoff. And I don't think that ride comes to an end in Lubbock on Saturday. It might come to an end. I just don't think it'll be there.
What a circus that Big 12 title game would be in Dallas if Deion went back. Wow. Wow.
That would be really, really
rich
fun.
Theater.
Fascinating theater. Let's hit a Friday night game, and then we'll go one that somehow has slipped below the radar. Let's go Friday night, Iowa, UCLA. Bruins probably played their best game of the season, Steve, and winning in Lincoln on Saturday. And now Iowa, and notice how I'm pronouncing it. No longer is it Iowa, it's Iowa, because they have an O. They can run the football, and they're scoring.
Yeah, I think Iowa played their best game of the season last week, too, in a blowout over Wisconsin, who's a team that they've had a ton of battles. I like what I've seen from Iowa. I think Sullivan brings more to the table as a quarterback. Caleb has been unbelievable in what he's done this year, and everybody talking about Genty being a nation's leader. He's right behind him. The touchdowns are astounding, and even when you factor in the uniform that he wears. UCLA with one of the most puzzling, or I should say surprising wins last week. How they did it, and a team that gets better every week. I just feel like that Iowa defense, UCLA seeing it for the first time, it travels, it frustrates you, it stretches you into wideness you do not want to be in. So I'm going to take Iowa to win the game Friday night.
I don't know if Iowa
OC Tim Lester should win the Broyles Award, but he should win like a humanitarian award for saving us from having to watch Iowa's offense that we had to watch the last couple of years. They are scoring 30.8 points per game, which puts them 45th and basically 85 spots ahead of where they were before. And they're certainly not going to be mistaken for the 08 Patriots on offense, but they are a completely functional, sometimes fun to watch unit. And to go that far as they've gone, 2 quarterbacks, obviously in Caleb Johnson, they have one of the best tailbacks in the country this year. Just a lot of credit goes to Iowa. Sorry, UCLA has played great. I give Deshaun Foster a ton of credit. That was a season on the brink that could have tanked, and they have rallied, and he has quietly done one of the better coaching jobs in college football this season. But you go Friday night in Kinnick, the defense is going to be the defense. I can't pull the trigger on the Bruins.
It's really a certain chicken or egg type of argument here, because UCLA has one of the best rush defenses in the country. And Pete, by the way, I do think this game's in the Rose Bowl on Friday night, home game for UCLA.
Oh, it is in the Rose Bowl. I'm sorry.
Yeah, home game.
You're right.
Home game for UCLA. But the Bruins have one of the best run defenses in the country. And they have Caleb Johnson coming in, as Steve alluded to, averaging like 146 yards per game, second to Genty in the country. But they have one of the worst pass defenses. But I bring this up. Is it just easy to pass on UCLA? Is it a product of who they played? And it's not because you can't run on them. We're going to find out, because Iowa will definitely try to run on them. And Iowa has one of the bottom 5 pass offenses by yards per game in the country. There's a lot pointing to UCLA here, but and there's also the travel and the time zone thing. You know what? I'm going to talk myself into it. Travel, time zone, home game, and I'm going to bank that UCLA makes it hard enough to run against them, and I'm going to pick UCLA, Pally, as Jim Herrick used to say, to UCLA. I'll pick UCLA to pull the upset. They're about a 5.5 point underdog.
Can we throw a prop bet in? Who has more fans, Iowa or UCLA?
Oh, that's Iowa. Iowa by far.
All sunburnt.
And guess what? What a great trip for Iowa fans. And I'll be very happy for them if they win. You get the game on Friday night, and then you have the whole day Saturday to enjoy Southern California. And then if you need to fly back home on Sunday, you can. That's a good weekend. Better weekend trip if you guys are right and I'm wrong. I mean, they'll enjoy themselves. I'll be happy for them if that's the case.
Big weekend for the Iowa Alumni Association, because I have a feeling there were a lot of chartered trips to take in the Rose Bowl and do that.
I'm sure. Then not too long ago they were there as a team. Wasn't
that
long ago?
Yeah,
although they might be trying to forget about seeing Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah,
that day. That was
a good day.
Well, they didn't see him because he just went by him.
That was an excellent day. That was a good one.
Well, he goes by a lot of folks. I don't know if you can. We call this our deep cut. I don't know if you can go deep cut when you're talking about number 4 team in the country in Miami, taking on Georgia Tech. So this game last year was the one that set everybody sideways. With Mario Cristobal, he could have taken a knee and won the game. Instead, they ran the ball. They fumbled. Haynes King led the drive back, and here come the Yellow Jackets, a rambling wreck to get the win. I don't remember who started last time. Steve, I'm going to start with you. Miami, Georgia Tech is early start, sleepy. Miami plays with its food regularly. What do you got? What do you got on this game on Saturday?
Yeah, it's really interesting with Miami, as you pointed out. They played a noon game against Louisville, looked great, fumbled it up, in the second half. Last week they had to come from behind in a noon kick at home against Miami or Duke. And when you look at this matchup, Georgia Tech's a team we started the season with over in Dublin, Ireland, with the win against Florida State, and we've seen how those two teams have gone. But they've fallen off the radar. They're 5-4, but they still play a very strenuous style of offense in as far as shifts and motions and clock. So this one is dicey. I do believe, Cam will have his cape on again. Miami will win, but Miami -11 is what the spread is. I think this is a lot closer than that. They're going to have to play 60 again. Not sure which minutes of the 60 they're going to choose to play, but it'll be enough. Miami wins closely against Georgia Tech.
I think Tech can cover in this game, and I just think we saw the game plan of what they're going to try to do on the field in Dublin that night, guys. Right? Miami had 14 possessions in its last game. I believe Florida State had 7. I think there were 14 total possessions in that game in Dublin. So we have Haynes King looming. Brent Key said this week is a game time decision. Also, very key to stop the number one offense in the country is going to be the potential return of linebacker Kyle Eford. He is kind of the do everything, like glue rock of that Georgia Tech defense. And if you're going to try to neutralize Ward's improvisational and scrambling ability, he's the biggest key on that on that defense. Along maybe with Romello Height. Remember watching him, Rece, on the field in Dublin? He certainly looks different, than your average ACC edge. So I think Georgia Tech finds a way to gum it up. I love, Rece is saying plays with his food because I watch Teddy Thamel do that constantly, and it is, it is a factor. I just think Miami has given us the benefit of the doubt. Remember going into the season, everyone said, well, we don't trust Miami because of Mario Cristobal. We don't trust Miami with Mario Cristobal. Well, they've figured it out. Every time adversity has come, some of it self-inflicted, they figured it out. So I think Miami figures it out in a tight one on the flats.
You know how you figure it out? Put the ball in the hands of number one. Mm-hmm. I mean, Cam Ward. You realize? Think about the legacy of quarterbacks at Miami. Jim Kelly, Vinny Testaverde, Ken Dorsey. Go even for if we've got some real old heads listening to us. George Myra way back in the day. That's for any great grandpa who happens to have figured out how to use a podcast. They've had great quarterbacks. Craig Erickson, Steve Walsh. And the next touchdown pass that Cam Ward throws, he will break Steve Walsh's single season record with his 30th. And Miami has more games to play, and he will get that record on Saturday. I agree with you guys that Georgia Tech, I think, will make it difficult, but I think what happened to Miami will have their full attention on this game. I would probably be inclined to take the points. I just don't see how Georgia Tech could actually make enough winning plays to pull the upset. So I will take Miami to just barely not cover. So basically, what's the line? 11 right now? I say Miami wins by 10, or you get the push. I think this offense is may not be unstoppable, but probably completely unstoppable by Tech. But you guys make a good point. Miami's defense hasn't been great, and the best way to neutralize Cam Ward is to make sure that he doesn't have very many opportunities. If Georgia Tech can do that, then maybe they're a play or so away from winning it. But I'll say Miami remains undefeated and marches on toward that ACC championship game. Anything else you like out there, big fella, that you're going to put on the big board on Saturday that's jumping off the page at you?
Steve's hot, Reece. He's hot.
What were you last week, Steve, on
2-1.
2-1?
2-1. Yep.
I mean, that's Hall of Fame.
20 and 10. 20 and 10.
Maybe that's really good.
I'm going to be probably a needle in Pete's side this week because there's some people I'm not sure who are playing in games that
poke away, man. I'm here to help. Poke away. Poke away.
No, I
like when Steve looks guilty. He's like, "Do you have an update on Kent's quarterback?" And I'm like, "Sure." It was my top priority today.
Yeah, it looks like Kent will be as far as our weeknight action the rest of the year. No, I'm really excited for the weekend. It's my favorite place to go for game day. Plenty at stake. The 3:30 window is spectacular as far as games. Make sure you got multiple TVs for that. In the games we covered all the big games there. So hey, we
Michigan,
got
Indiana's in that window too.
Yeah. We're gonna find out how many Michigan fans usually go to that game and who are going to that game this year. No, but with these new numbers against these teams, we got everything. So there's plenty at stake, and it's only going to get bigger as we go through November. So I'm super, super fired up.
Okay, we're going to do this like we do picks at the end. I don't need any analysis. I just need a yes or no here, just so we don't miss anything if there's a potential upset. BYU unbeaten on the road, rivalry game at Utah. Any trouble for the Cougars, Pete Thamel?
Nope.
Steve?
Yes.
Trouble meaning you're picking the upset, or just trouble?
No. BYU has to withstand the fury of that game in that first half with a new bunch of guys I believe that haven't played there.
Yeah, renewing that rivalry. I don't know, that that feels like one that might be problematic because the mighty Utah student section will be revved up.
Yeah.
I'm gonna think about picking that one Saturday. Keep an eye on that. It's been it's not enough. It's not enough.
There's some quarterback uncertainty there, Rece. I would dial in on that a little bit.
No, I know. I know. That will be.
I mean, there's really been quarterback uncertainty for 20 years at Utah. So I guess that's not new.
That will be. Listen, if that happens, and right now BYU's a 4-point favorite. If I were to, go against the grain on Saturday during the picks, when everybody picks BYU, and rightfully so, it will be purely an emotional play, purely a Kyle Whittingham rises up against the alma mater. They play with their hair on fire. They block some punts. A ball bounces off a tuba. Things go their way. It's not that I think that they're better. BYU's better than they are, but I don't know.
Number of Kyle Whittingham quarterbacks drafted during his 2 decades of Hall of Fame coaching.
Well, Alex Smith. Right?
Nope. Urban Meyer.
Oh, that's right. That's right. On the staff, but not the head coach. By the way, 0. Brian Johnson didn't get drafted, did he?
Sure didn't.
Okay.
Don't mention him to Nick. He gave Nick fits in that Sugar Bowl.
Yes, he did.
Don't bring that game up to Alabama fans, Pete. Don't.
They weren't trying. I remember.
Come on now.
I remember. Sorry.
Don't do it.
I didn't say they weren't. Nobody said they weren't trying. They said they didn't care, which, there's some, they didn't give the appropriate level of care is the better way to say those things.
Understood.
Those things, that doesn't mean they would have won. They probably wouldn't have, even if they had given the appropriate level of care. Utah was really good that year. The question is, will they be good enough against BYU Saturday night?
It would take utter chaos, Rece, but the one team, they weren't mentioned last night, they don't have a number. The one team that could be a story, and I think the world of their head coach and their program and their uniforms also help, is the team that plays in the state we're going to, and that's Tulane. Watch out. We talked a little bit about them, Steve, just before you joined us on the ranking show about. That's a good football team, man.
Really good team. If they win the American and if someone other than Boise State wins the Mountain West, then that they could be in prime position. A lot of football to be played. Going to be a great weekend. Join us on College Game Day Saturday morning from Baton Rouge. Ought to be a great scene there as Alabama comes in. We encourage you, download the podcast wherever you prefer to get your podcast or subscribe and never miss a single episode.